Let's begin by exploring the core idea of an ecological niche. In ecology, a niche describes the unique position a species occupies within its ecosystem. This includes not only the habitat it lives in, but also its role, how it interacts with other organisms and the environment. Think of it as both the species' address and its profession. The concept has evolved over the past century, but it remains a crucial tool for understanding how nature works. Every species, even those closely related, tends to have a slightly different niche, which helps reduce competition and allows for coexistence. As we move forward, we'll see how these differences shape the abundance and distribution of species. Ecological niche is more than just a place to live. It's a combination of the conditions a species needs to survive and the role it plays in its ecosystem. This includes its food sources, the climate it can tolerate, and even its daily or seasonal routines. For example, some birds might specialize in eating insects from tree bark, while others feed on seeds from the ground. These differences help explain why certain species are found in specific places and not others. As we'll see, understanding a species' niche is key to predicting where it can live and how it interacts with other species. Niche concept has two main sides. First, it describes how the environment affects a species, what it needs to survive. Second, it considers how the species affects its environment and other organisms. These two aspects are deeply connected. For instance, a plant needs sunlight and water, but it also provides food and shelter for insects. In most ecological studies, both sides are considered together because the survival of one species often depends on the presence or absence of others. This interconnectedness is what makes ecosystems so dynamic and complex. Ecologists often use three main approaches to describe niches. The first focuses on the environmental conditions a species needs. The second emphasizes the species' functional role, what it does in the ecosystem. The third looks at the species' position within a local community, shaped by its requirements and its interactions with others. Each approach offers a different perspective, but together they provide a fuller picture of how species fit into their environment. As we continue, we'll dive deeper into each of these approaches and see how they help us understand the natural world. First approach to niches is all about habitat requirements. This idea, introduced by Joseph Grinnell, focuses on the physical and biological factors that determine where a species can live. These factors include things like temperature, food preferences, and microhabitat features. For example, some birds might only nest in certain types of trees, or some fish might only thrive in specific water temperatures. Understanding these requirements helps ecologists predict where a species might be found and how it might respond to changes in its environment. Second approach, championed by Charles Elton, looks at the functional role of a species. Here, the focus is on what the species does its job in the ecosystem. For example, some animals are pollinators, others are predators, and some are decomposers. Different species can fill similar roles in different places. Think of how both kangaroo rats and jerboas have adapted to similar desert roles, even though they're unrelated. This approach is especially useful for understanding food webs and how energy flows through ecosystems. Third approach to niches emphasizes a species' position within its community. This view, formalized by George Hutchinson, considers how a species' requirements and interactions with others shape its place in a complex web of relationships. Hutchinson described the niche as a hypervolume, a multidimensional space defined by all the environmental factors a species needs to survive and reproduce. This approach helps explain how species can coexist, even when they seem to need similar resources. Hutchinson introduced two important terms, the fundamental niche and the realized niche. The fundamental niche is the full range of conditions where a species could survive and reproduce if there were no competitors. The realized niche is the actual set of conditions where the species exists, after accounting for competition and other interactions. For example, a plant might be able to grow in many soil types, but if other plants outcompeted in some soils, its realized niche will be small. This distinction helps ecologists understand why species aren't always found everywhere they could potentially live. While the idea of a niche as a multidimensional space is powerful, it's not always easy to measure in practice. There can be countless environmental variables to consider, and it's often hard to know which ones matter most. Sometimes just a few key factors are enough to separate species, but in other cases the important differences are subtle or hard to detect. This makes it challenging to precisely define and measure the niche of a real species, especially in complex ecosystems. Central idea in niche theory is the competitive exclusion principle. This principle states that no two species can occupy exactly the same niche in a stable environment. If two species compete for the same limited resource, one will eventually outcompete the other, leading to its exclusion. This concept, supported by both mathematical models and experiments, explains why closely related species often have slightly different niches, allowing them to coexist without direct competition. How similar can two species be and still coexist? The theory of limiting similarity addresses this question. It suggests there's a minimum difference required between species niches for them to coexist. If their niches overlap too much, competition will drive one out. This leads to the idea of species packing, how closely species can be spaced in niche space. The spacing depends on factors like how they use resources and whether they reproduce sexually or asexually. These dynamics shape the diversity and structure of ecological communities. Ways species reproduce can affect how they're spaced in niche space. In sexually reproducing species, genetic recombination creates a range of trait combinations, but some may be less fit. This can lead to the evolution of distinct species with non-overlapping niches. In contrast, asexual species can maintain favorable combinations without recombination, allowing them to occupy a wider variety of niches. These differences influence how species diversify and adapt to their environment. Species can coexist in several ways. Sometimes they evolve differences in their niches to reduce competition, a process called character displacement. Other times, one species is a specialist, dominating a narrow niche, while another is a generalist, able to survive in a broader range of conditions. In plants, fast-growing but less competitive species can quickly colonize open spaces before being overtaken by stronger competitors. These strategies help maintain biodiversity within ecosystems. Species are very similar. Competitive exclusion can take a long time. Sometimes chance events and random fluctuations, known as community drift, play a bigger role. Dispersal limitations can also affect which species are present in a community. In some ecosystems, like tropical forests, the number of coexisting species is so high that it's unlikely each has a unique niche. Instead, dispersal and random processes may be more important than niche differences in shaping these communities. Ecologists distinguish between dispersal assembled and niche assembled communities. In dispersal assembled communities, like many tropical forests, the presence of species is determined more by their ability to reach and colonize new areas than by niche differences. In niche assembled communities, differences in species niches play a bigger role in determining which species coexist. Both processes can operate together, shaping the diversity and structure of ecosystems. Some cases, rare species have an advantage simply because they're rare. For example, in tropical forests, rare tree species may escape the attention of specialized pests and pathogens that target more common species. This frequency dependence helps maintain high species diversity, as no single species can dominate for long. It's another way that coexistence can be maintained, even when niches are similar. Natural question is, how many ecological niches are there in an environment? The answer depends on the diversity of resources and the trade-off species face in using them. While the total number of individuals is limited by available resources, the number of niches isn't always fixed. Trade-offs mean that specializing in one resource often comes at the cost of being less efficient at others. This creates a limited number of mutually exclusive ways to survive, and thus a limited number of niches. Trade-offs are central to niche diversity. For example, a bird with a large beak may be great at cracking big seeds but struggle with small ones. Plants might invest in rapid growth or in building strong trunks, but not both. These trade-offs mean that no species can be the best at everything, leading to a variety of specialized niches. Evolution explores these possibilities, but only a limited number of strategies are viable at any one time. In some cases, scientists can predict the number of niches by studying resource diversity and how species use those resources. For example, the number of Galapagos finch species on an island can be predicted by analyzing the distribution of seed sizes and the relationship between beak size and feeding efficiency. Similar patterns are seen in other groups, like crossbills and their specialized beaks for different conifer seeds. Community convergence is the phenomenon where unrelated species evolve similar traits to exploit similar resources in different places. For example, Annelise lizards on different Caribbean islands have independently evolved into similar ecological types or ecomorphs. This shows that certain niches are predictable based on available resources, even if the exact species filling them are different. While resource diversity and trade-offs set the stage for niche diversity, the total number of species in an environment is also limited by the total amount of resources. Each species needs a minimum population size to survive, so there's a cap on how many can coexist. However, the number of possible niches often exceeds the number of species actually present, leaving room for future evolutionary changes. Species abundance and distribution are often linked to its niche. Species with broader niches, those that can use a wider range of resources, tend to be more abundant and widespread. However, other factors like dispersal ability and chance events also play a role. Sometimes, abundant species are generalists, while others are specialists that thrive where their preferred resources are plentiful. Most ecosystems, a few species are common while most are rare. This pattern, called the species abundance distribution, can be explained by how niche space is divided among species. Models that simulate sequential resource partitioning predict these patterns well. However, models based on dispersal and random processes can also explain the observed distributions, highlighting the interplay between niche differences and spatial dynamics. Closely related species often have very different niches. This diversity is driven by interspecific competition, which pushes species to specialize in different resources. When competition is low, such as on isolated islands, species can rapidly diversify to fill available niches. Over time, natural selection favors traits that reduce overlap and competition, leading to a wide variety of specialized forms. Niche diversification isn't driven by competition alone. Each species also undergoes its own evolutionary optimization, adapting to make the most of available resources. Sometimes this leads to extreme specialization, which can be risky if conditions change. Evolution is opportunistic, and while specialization can offer short-term advantages, it may reduce a species' ability to survive in a changing world. Over time, species often become more specialized, narrowing their niche width. This is driven by both competition with other species and optimization within the species. However, when a species enters a new environment without competitors, its niche can expand, a process called ecological release. Niche width can also vary due to phenotypic plasticity, where individuals adjust their traits in response to environmental changes. Sometimes, species niches remain narrow even when it seems they could expand. Physiological limits like tolerance to temperature or the presence of competitors can restrict niche width. Gene flow from central populations to marginal areas can also limit adaptation to new conditions, creating sharp range boundaries even in gradually changing environments. Sexual reproduction or self-fertilization can help species adapt to extreme or marginal habitats. These strategies allow small populations to persist without needing mates and prevent gene flow that might hinder local adaptation. Many plants and some animals in harsh environments rely on these reproductive modes to survive and thrive. Some groups of species show regular cycles of dispersal, specialization, and extinction, known as taxon cycles. For example, birds on Caribbean islands often start as generalist colonizers, then specialize and become more restricted over time, sometimes ending in local extinction. These cycles illustrate how niches and species distributions can change over evolutionary timescales. Species don't just adapt to their environment, they also change it. Some organisms, called ecosystem engineers, have a major impact on their surroundings. Beavers build dams, earthworms alter soil, and plants produce oxygen. These changes can create new niches for other species, shaping entire communities and ecosystems. Humans are perhaps the most influential ecosystem engineers. Through agriculture, urbanization, and technology, we have dramatically altered environments worldwide. This has created new niches for some species while eliminating others. Our actions illustrate the powerful feedback between organisms and their environments and the dynamic nature of ecological niches. When species modify their environment, they can set off a feedback loop, changing their own niches and those of others. This process, called coevolution, means that species and their niches evolve together. Sometimes these changes are rapid and dramatic. Other times, ecological requirements remain stable for long periods, allowing us to reconstruct ancient environments from fossil records. Despite the potential for change, many species' ecological requirements remain stable over evolutionary time. This phenomenon, known as niche conservatism, means that some species track changing environments by moving rather than adapting. Evolutionary constraints and trade-offs often limit how much a species can change, leading to long-term stability in some niches. Even as species come and go, some functional niches like pollinators or decomposers remain stable within ecosystems. Different species may fill these roles over time, but the overall structure of the ecosystem persists. This highlights the resilience of ecological systems and the importance of functional diversity. Niche width describes how broadly a species uses available resources. It can be measured by looking at traits like beak size or jaw shape, or by analyzing the range of resources used. Both variation within individuals and differences between individuals contribute to total niche width. This concept helps distinguish generalists, which use many resources, from specialists, which focus on a few. Niche breadth is a related concept that measures the diversity of resources a species uses. It's often calculated using indices like the Shannon or Simpson index, which account for both the number and frequency of resources used. These measures help ecologists compare generalists and specialists, but they can be sensitive to how resources are categorized. One way to model how resources are divided among species is through sequential resource partitioning. In this model, a common resource is divided step by step, with each new species taking a share. This process can explain the observed patterns of species abundance within communities, showing how niche space is allocated over time. Classic study of warblers showed that even closely related species can coexist by separating their niches along just a few axes, such as feeding behavior, height in the trees, and nesting time. This demonstrates how subtle differences can allow multiple species to share the same habitat without direct competition. On the Galapagos Islands, finches have evolved different beak sizes depending on whether they live alone or with competitors. When two species coexist, their beak sizes diverge, reducing competition for food. This process, known as character displacement, is a vivid example of how competition shapes niche evolution. In plant communities, some species are less competitive but grow and spread quickly. These species can take advantage of open spaces before being overtaken by stronger competitors. This strategy, known as the regenerative niche, helps maintain diversity by giving fast-growing species a temporary advantage. Sometimes, a species can persist in a habitat where it can't reproduce successfully, thanks to a continuous influx of individuals from more favorable areas. This source-sink dynamic means that species distributions are shaped not just by niche requirements, but also by movement and dispersal between habitats. Species with high dispersal ability can expand their range more easily, sometimes occupying habitats that only marginally meet their niche requirements. This metapopulation dynamic can lead to complex patterns of abundance and distribution, influenced by both ecological and spatial factors. In some ecosystems, species are not evenly spaced in niche space but form clumps, groups of species with similar niches. This can result from dispersal assembly processes or from frequency-dependent interactions. These clumps challenge the idea that all species must be evenly separated by niche differences. As species evolve and adapt, their niches can shift, leading to changes in community structure. Sometimes, new species fill old roles, while in other cases, entirely new niches emerge. This ongoing process of niche evolution is a key driver of biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Summary: the ecological niche is a dynamic concept that helps us understand how species interact with each other and their environment. It explains patterns of abundance, diversity, and adaptation, and highlights the importance of both competition and cooperation. As we've seen, niches are shaped by evolution, trade-offs, and feedback between organisms and their surroundings. By studying niches, we gain insight into the complexity and resilience of life on Earth.